Baseball isn't just numbers, numbers, numbers.
This game is not being played on computers.
You don't do that with a bunch of statistical gimmicks.
You don't put a team together with a computer.
We're talking weighted runs created plus,
expected WOBA,
his sweet spot rate,
defensive runs above average,
average exit velocity,
barrel rate,
xFIP,
BABIP,
SIERA.
We are above replacement radio. And welcome to Above Replacement Radio. We're talking baseball kind of whenever. I'm your host, Chris Gianza. Over there on the other side of the screen is Daniel Curran. How you doing, Daniel?
Chris, I'm doing very well today. We've had a Hall of Fame election happen in the last few days. I gave my reaction for it, but you haven't seen it because I forgot to send you the file. But by the time everyone is seeing this, it will be out, and everyone will know my thoughts on this year's Hall of Fame election.
Yes, indeed. Pretty, albeit, one guy just missed, but pretty successful year of Hall of Faming this year, it seems like, and I'm sure you got into that, but yeah, good to, in a year full of sort of, of dry and very uneventful ballots or uneventful inductions, we get three, which is very, very nice.
Yeah.
So yeah, before we get into sort of the main subjects of the episode, we have one bit of news to get into with Rhys Hoskins, of Phillies fame, signing with the Brewers for 2 years, $34 million. What did you think about this move?
So it's actually interesting because we did our free agent predictions a couple months ago now, and I had Rhys Hoskins going to the Mariners. My original thought was Brewers because I thought that was the best fit. It was a positional and skill set need for Milwaukee. It was a good ballpark for a guy like Rhys Hoskins to hit in. But I ended up putting the Mariners because I just didn't think Milwaukee would want to spend that money. I thought they'd be selling a lot more this offseason. There's been a lot of rumors surrounding guys like Corbin Burns, guys like Christian Yelich, even a guy like Devin Williams. And I thought that they were going to go all in on selling this offseason, but doesn't sound like they're doing that. Corbin Burns seems to be staying. They haven't. The only guy they've really traded is Mark Canha. So it's good to see that the Brewers are still going for it as of right now.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, like with the direction they seem to be going in with Craig Counsell leaving, David Stearns leaving, and just like how they're not really they haven't acted like a big market team as of late. Yeah, it definitely seemed like things were going in the wrong direction, but they did pick up a solid bat, and you're very right in that it is a very good fit. Rhys Hoskins is very power driven. He's probably going to work out pretty well in that ballpark, and also the Brewers last year had the third lowest ISO, third lowest slugging percentage minus batting average, which is kind of how much of your offense production is from your power. The Brewers had the third lowest number in that. And it's something that actually correlates to run production quite a bit. Picking up Rhys Hoskins, especially after sort of a disappointing year from Rowdy Tellez and ultimately the departure of Rowdy Tellez, it's a very good fit for the Brewers.
Yeah, not only that, but specifically they've needed right-handed power hitters for quite some time now. In 2023, the Brewers produced a 93 weighted runs created plus out of all of their right-handed hitters. That ranked tied for 19th in all of Major League Baseball. They had a 153 ISO, which goes back to what you just mentioned. That ranked 21st. And then they also had a 393 slugging percentage from the right-handed hitters, and that ranked 23rd. So they've desperately needed right-handed power hitters. They have a ballpark that's like catered perfectly to power hitters specifically. They just haven't, utilized the park very well over the last few years. And Rhys Hoskins kind of comes in sort of the same way that I feel like William Contreras came in last year, where you look at that and think, is this the best hitter in this lineup actually? And that could be almost a feeling with Rhys Hoskins if he utilizes his power the right way, if he pulls the ball enough, and he keeps the fly ball rate where it is. He's gonna be a guy that gets you the counting stats. He'll hit you 20, maybe 25 homers, maybe more. He'll drive in, a good amount of runs. The rate stats are, more where the question marks lie. But I mean, given the standard set that the Brewers offense has set in the last few years, I think this could be a major upgrade somewhere.
Yeah, for sure. It's sort of like it's not. This isn't the exact translation. I'm not saying Rhys Hoskins is this, but like sort of one man's trash is another man's treasure. Not necessarily that Hoskins is trash, but he's more valuable in the Brewers lineup than he would be in a lot of other lineups. As you mentioned, they only had a 93 weighted runs created plus out of the right-handers last year, and yeah, Rhys Hoskins he's gonna bring some slugging. He has in 2021, just as recently as 2021, he slugged 530. That's very, very good. He slugged 462 in 2022. And, of course, in 2023, tore his ACL and he was unable to play at all. So, hoping that the recovery can be pretty clean on that. But with the Brewers lineup, I was looking at sort of their projected lineup, and I see, I'm not going to go out and say like, oh, they're going to be a good lineup, but I see the P word a lot, potential.
Yeah, there's a lot of upside, but a lot of questions.
Yes, for sure. And that comes with the youth of their lineup. So, just going top to bottom, Christian Yelich, he's coming off a pretty good year. I don't see any reason why that falls back how he falls back under, a below average hitter. William Contreras is surging. He's keeping going. Sal Frelick, obviously one of the top prospects in baseball last year. He obviously has potential. I'm not sure. He's not going to slug a lot, but he could potentially get on base a lot. Rhys Hoskins, they just signed. We just talked about Willy Adames. He's someone who we may be talking about in the top 10 shortstops. He significantly underperformed his expected numbers last year. Garrett Mitchell was another guy who was a top prospect. He got injured last year. He seemed to be doing pretty well before he got injured last year. Then Jackson Corio, who's the number 2 prospect in baseball. Like, that's 1 through 7. There's a lot of guys where you could easily see them being above average hitters this year, which is, it seems like that's a good sign for the Brewers, albeit, not every one of them is going to be an above average hitter. And, none of them you would see being, silver slugger people, except for maybe William Contreras because of the
Whole catcher thing.
the competition at his position. But yeah, I think there's some potential there.
I think there's a lot of good cases to say that Rhys Hoskins might be the most reliable bat in this lineup, because there are a lot of question marks here. There's potential, yes, but is Sal Frelick going to take that step forward? Is Garrett Mitchell going to take that step forward? Will Jackson Chorio live up to the hype in year 1? Christian Yelich has been very up and down the last few years. William Contreras had, a lot of good batted ball luck last year. Will that go down? Willy Adames had a below average weighted runs created plus last season. Rhys Hoskins feels like the most reliable bat in this lineup right now, I would say.
Yeah, for sure. Especially just looking at numbers, like he's been fairly consistently above average, like every single season of his career, with no matter the length of it, no matter the length of that season, he's been at least a 112 weighted runs created plus, and in most cases he's been at least 20% above average as a hitter. So yeah, I think that's definitely something that the Brewers needed, is not having necessarily a question mark. He's probably going to deliver pretty well, which is very nice and good to have on a fairly short-term deal.
Yeah, no, I like the move for Milwaukee. I like the move for Rhys Hoskins. I think that ballpark will play very friendly to his style of offense, and maybe we'll be talking about him on a top 10 first base list next season.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So yeah, anything more on the Rhys Hoskins signing?
No, I think that's it.
All right, awesome. So yeah, that moves us along to positional rankings. This is the 4th of 5 episodes we're doing them, tackling 2 positions at a time. and we will, after positional rankings end, we will get into players to watch from each team through the next 6 weeks, and I believe probably doing like a top 50 players in baseball list on top of that. So excited to be doing that. But this week we have catchers and shortstops, and we're going to be starting with the catchers. And before we get into all of it, we kind of reference a lot of underlying numbers. Been talking about projections for 2024. These are all what we think they're going to do in 2024. So we use a lot of underlying numbers like strikeout rate, walk rate, batted ball numbers in terms of average exit velocity, barrel rate, fly ball rate, line drive rate, sweet spot rate. And that's just because it's a better projector of future success as opposed to maybe their actual results. Maybe they got a little bit lucky on ground balls or something like that. So that's why we use a lot of underlying numbers. And also all these positions are based on what the Fangraphs roster resource has them projected as. I don't think that was necessarily much of a problem this time around, because catcher and shortstop is fairly set in stone. That's all I have to preface here. So who is your number 10 catcher in baseball for 2024?
Yeah, I'm going to start this out with what might be considered a hot take. I'd be very surprised to see if you also have this guy on your list, Chris. But my number 10 catcher, a guy that I'm pretty high on coming into 2024, is Jake Rogers from the Detroit Tigers. Jake Rogers, I think, had a really interesting season last year. And I'm interested to see if he can build on that in what would potentially be his first full season in the majors. So just to give you an idea, the thing that stood out to me the most, 26.3% of Jake Rogers' batted balls, his 285 batted balls last year, were hard hit and in the sweet spot. That was the fourth highest rate in baseball, minimum 200 batted balls, trailing only Aaron Judge, JD Martinez, and Yordan Alvarez, and just ahead of Kyle Schwarber, Shohei Ohtani, and Bryce Harper. So those are like 6 elite hitters with Jake Rogers sandwiched right in the middle. Not to mention he played excellent defense last year. He had, I believe, 10.5 defensive runs above average on Fangraphs, which, albeit the catcher position is a lot easier than some other positions to accumulate defensive runs above average, but 10.4 is very good. That's probably elite, especially for someone that only had 365 plate appearances last year. Not to mention, his blocking and his framing on Statcast were also both excellent. He's a guy that hits the ball very hard. He's a guy that lifts the ball a lot. He had a pretty good fly ball or line drive rate of 24.1%, a good fly ball rate of 32.4%. Obviously, Detroit is not the most ideal ballpark to do that in, but you know what? He's been making it work, and I feel like there could be a lot of upside in a full season of Jake Rogers. So I have him in my number 10.
Yeah, that is definitely a hot take. I was not really considering him. I don't think MLB Network had him in their top 10. So yeah, it is definitely a the Shredder. That's no diss to you. The Shredder has been doing some interesting things as of late. But
I'm fine with being like the lone Jake Rogers guy right now because I get it.
Yeah. I mean, you'll be the first to the party, which is something to say. So yeah, my number 10 had an excellent offensive year, and based on his offense, you could rank him potentially higher. But also, he's a newer guy to the league, and I'm talking about Astros catcher Yainer Diaz. He slugged .538 with an .846 OPS last year, and out of 24 primary catchers with 350 plus plate appearances last year, his slugging and OPS ranked first. He was basically plate appearance for plate appearance, pretty much the best offensive catcher in baseball last year, which is pretty crazy to say. And he also was in line with his expected numbers. He was 92nd percentile in expected batting average and 96th percentile in expected slugging. Along with that, he was a pretty neutral defender. If he's someone who can do this on a consistent basis and be an everyday catcher for the Astros while putting up those offensive numbers, he's going to rise among these ranks. I think the only reason why I don't have him up higher is I need to kind of see him do it again, and continue to do this. But I mean, pretty amazing season, and definitely for me, he earned that top 10 status just based on what he was able to do offensively while being a pretty neutral defender as a backstop for the Astros. So yeah, Yainer Diaz is my number 10. Who do you have as your number 9?
My number 9, this might also be considered a hot take. On the opposite side of the spectrum, someone you'd think wouldn't be on the list to someone that might be higher. And I feel like you probably view this guy the same, but in any other year other than this one, I think this guy would be a top tier catcher. I'm talking about JT Realmuto. He regressed pretty heavily throughout the 2023 season. Just on defensive runs above average alone, he was a negative after being plus 18 and plus 16 in 2021 and 2022, respectively. The first time he's been a negative defensive runs above average catcher since 2016. So a lot of defensive regression happened there. Not to mention, he also set a career high, or excuse me, basically a career high in strikeout rate. He did strike out more in his 11 games played in 2014, but in a full season, his highest career strikeout rate. Also, his lowest career walk rate in any season since 2017. Struck out 25.6% of the time, walked only 6.5% of the time. So that was an issue. He also kind of just started popping the ball up out of nowhere. He set a career high in pop-up rate at 9.3% this year. There are a lot of things that I'm very concerned about with JT Realmuto. He's going into his age 33 season right now, and his framing most particularly is what's been alarming, because in 2021, he was an 85th percentile framer on StatCast, and then he went to 50th percentile in 2022, and then second percentile with negative 13 framing runs in 2023, which is certainly not what you want to see. And oh, by the way, Fangraphs agrees. He had plus 8.6 framing runs in 2021, 1.1 framing run in 2022, negative 12.2 in 2023. So no matter where you look, it was a massive defensive regression from JT Realmuto. He was a borderline above average offensive player, which is also a bit of regression for him. And I don't know. I'm very concerned about what last season might be telling about JT Realmuto's future.
Yeah, that was extremely odd from JT Realmuto last year. Like there's it some of it seems sort of anomalous, but there are some worrisome trends. And yeah, it's definitely it's weird to evaluate JT Realmuto this year, considering how awesome he was in 2022 and even a little bit before that, and how disappointing his 2023 was. So it's weird to balance like, well, actually, how good is this guy? How is he bouncing back? Is he not? It's a very weird thing. So now on to my number 9, who is kind of the opposite of Yainer Diaz. He's all defense, not a lot of offense. I'm talking about Patrick Bailey, who hit your all MLB underrated team last year. So Patrick Bailey led all catchers in fielding run value and defensive runs above average last year. And he was second among all fielders in fielding run value. And he was first among all fielders in defensive runs above average in 2023. So, the most defensively valuable player in baseball last year. Offensively, kind of struggled on the surface, at least. He had a 644 OPS, but underperformed his expected slugging by 61 points. So you'd think that maybe things can balance out a little bit. And he underperformed his expected slugging on fly balls by 345 points. And I know that some of that is sort of natural when you're playing at Oracle Park, where there's a lot of deep parts of that ballpark. However, I think that might balance out a little bit, and Patrick Bailey can be a guy who could get a 700 OPS this year while being possibly the best fielder in baseball, which would put him in the top 10 for me. So yeah, that's Patrick Bailey at number 9. Who do you have for your number 8?
Yeah, I mean, you pretty much nailed it there. Patrick Bailey was on my all underrated team, and I have him at number 8. I mean, yeah, you pretty much said everything that I was planning on saying. There are certainly improvements to be made offensively, but not only did he lead everyone in fielding runs and in defensive runs above average, but he did it in 97 games at the total. If we just imagine what that would look like in a full season, like we're talking Yadier Molina peak numbers, if he can do that. And yeah, he underperformed his expected numbers by quite a bit. He had an expected slugging of 420 and he slugged 359, right? If that balances out, he's probably a league average hitter. And if he continues at, that defensive pace while being a league average hitter, that's like a 5.5 to 6 win season over the course of like 130 games played as a catcher. And he needs to strike out less and walk more. I would love to see that, but yeah, I mean he is an absolutely gifted fielder. Blocking could be a little better, but he is a plus 16 in framing runs, a 1.87 pop time. Each of those are elite, and also six caught stealing above average runs, also 98th percentile. There are so many things that Patrick Bailey just not excelled wouldn't even be the right word, just completely lapped the field in last year at the catcher position defensively. Um, and he had, on a rate basis, is one of the best defensive catcher seasons we've seen since any sort of defense started being tracked. Going back maybe to 2008 when framing runs started being tracked on Fangraphs. And yeah, 2.8 wins above replacement in 97 games with a 78 weighted runs created plus. That's not normal. That does not happen. So yeah, I mean, if he can be a league average hitter and keep up that defensive pace, we're looking at a guy that's going to be probably like top 20 at the very least in the league in F4 among position players. So yeah, I have Patrick Bailey at my number 8, and that might even be an understatement come year's end.
Yeah, for sure. Like and also to add to his case, he was also a fairly neutral base runner as a catcher, which is pretty rare. Usually that's an automatic negative. Although he was negative 0.7, which is basically neutral. And then along with that, he's also only heading into his age 25 season. That was his rookie year. So he's due to develop a little bit more. So now on to my number 8, who is one of the better offensive players at this position. Talking about Wilson Contreras of the St. Louis Cardinals. He has a 125 OPS plus over the last 2 years, and out of 24 catchers with 600 plus plate appearances in the last 2 years, his OPS ranks second. His defense is fairly neutral. It seems, I think he might have had like -3 fielding run values or something last year, maybe -2. And it's nothing too egregious. So him having that along with great offense is a very good combination. The most alarming thing about last year, and maybe why I don't have him higher, is he ran 0.9 less feet per second than he did in 2022, which is a sign of slower speed. And he had a 15% extra base taken rate, which was 23 percentage points less than the year before. So it seems like he's going to be very negative on the bases, albeit his offense is pretty awesome for a catcher and his defense is fairly neutral. So I have him at number 8. What is your number 7?
At number 7, I have another kind of sneaky pick, maybe. I don't know if this is really considered sneaky because this is a name that pretty much most baseball fans know. But I'm more just predicting a breakout for him next year. I'm talking about Francisco Alvarez of the New York Mets. There are a lot of things that he did well last year. There are a lot of things that he didn't do so well. I mean, first of all, he's an elite framer already, +9 framing runs, very good defensive runs above average last year, 17.9 in only 123 games and 423 plate appearances. Obviously, like the upside of his offensive game has been very clear for many years now. He was a top prospect in baseball coming up. And he lifts the ball a lot. 31.9% fly ball rate, only a 15% line drive rate, and an 8.4% pop up rate, which obviously you would like to be lower. I think the only thing with him is he does hit a lot of balls straight away. For a guy that hits the ball in the air a lot, you don't want to hit as many balls straight away because they're going to result in more flyouts. Naturally, that's it's not part of the reason he has a third percentile expected batting average. That's probably because he strikes out quite a bit. But we've known that the upside has been there for Francisco Alvarez for a while, and for what was considered, not a great year for him in terms of batted ball profile, he still tuned out a almost league average 97 weighted runs created plus. So I think like a 120 to 130 is in there for this year, plus all that defensive value that he adds to the Mets. I think he's going to be a star catcher. I think he's going to be kind of what he was expected to be, and I think we could see it this year.
Yeah, for sure. He made his impact last year, and he was a number one prospect coming up. And we saw him on the Rumble Pony. Shout out to Binghamton.
Yes, we did.
So
Shout out to Binghamton.
So yeah, yes, for sure. So this is where my number 7 comes in. I'm going with JT Realmuto here, who you put at 9. Yeah, things were extremely weird with JT Realmuto last year. From 2022 to 2023, his fielding run value went from 13 to -9. His extra base taken rate went from 54% to 30%. BSR went from plus 6.6 to -1.5. His OPS plus went from 130 to 106. All of those were at least 8-year lows, which is just incredibly weird. It seems very, very random. I don't know what was going on there. I don't know if it's a trend or with a lot of these guys, I don't know if that's a trend or if that is just an outline season. So I would imagine some of those are outliers, or I imagine at least some of those numbers are going to balance out, and that's why I think he will be, still a top 7 catcher. But yeah, there are some things that are definitely alarming, with the extra base taken rate being as low as it was, the BSR being as low as it was, and also hitting. He was worse at hitting last year, and all these numbers were at least 8-year lows. So yeah, that's what dragged him down. I think last year he was a consensus top 2 catcher, so it's weird to have him down so low on our list this year. But that's how fast things sort of tapered off for him last year, and there's some new blood at the position as well, which came up above him. So yeah, we'll see about JT Realmuto this year. Was last year sort of a trend, or was it just a weird season? Who is your number 6?
At number 6, this might be another hot take. You're probably going to have this guy at higher than 6, and that's totally fine. But I put Will Smith at 6 of the Dodgers. He is coming off a career low in weighted runs created plus at only 119. He was, I think his biggest asset has always been his offense. He was kind of recognized as the best offensive catcher in baseball for a while. I don't know if he still holds that title with a 119 weighted runs created plus last year, and he still did a lot of things very well. A 119 is still very good. He had his best base running season. He had a strong defensive season on Fangraphs, but not quite on Baseball Savant. He was good at blocking and he was good at pop time, but his framing regressed this year to a -3. And in fact, he's also kind of always struggled with framing since he's come up. And that's a lot of the reason. But his batted ball profile also kind of went down a bit in the last year. He dropped some in exit velocity. He did have a decent sweet spot rate, but his expected numbers did take a bit of a dip. 473 and 472 expected slugging respectively in 2022 and 21. Only a 435 this year. He went down about 40 points in expected slugging. And his defense has been, all right. I mean, by like elite catcher standards, I would say. But there are definitely some better defensive guys out there. And I don't know if his offense has had the appeal that it used to have. So I put Will Smith at 6 for that reason.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, Will Smith is an interesting conversation because he made such an impression at such a young age, and we were talking about when is he going to be, it's going to be a matter of when, not if, when he's going to be like the best catcher in baseball. And we've actually seen his performance regress a little bit, although he still has time to get back to that status.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been weird. And some catchers have sort of jumped him on this list. So my number 6 is Jonah Heim, who is coming off a career year with the Rangers. So with Jonah Heim, among all fielders in the last 2 seasons, he is 4th in defensive runs above average. That led him to winning the Gold Glove last year. And what's impressive about Heim is he's made some just incremental or maybe even not so incremental progression offensively in like pretty much every category since 2021, which is why you kind of have to be high on the guy. He has improved his average on base percentage, slugging percentage, barrel rate, and expected WOBA each year since 2021. And along with that, he was an above average hitter last year while being fairly neutral on the bases, along with, being a Gold Glove defender. So that definitely has a tremendous value. And along with that, with his offense, what you can be optimistic about and how you can expect him to maybe outperform his expected numbers is out of 204 hitters with 500 plus batted balls in the last 2 seasons, Jonah Heim has the 9th highest pulled fly ball rate, the 9th highest rate of batted balls that are pulled fly balls. So yeah, that leads to maybe a little bit higher of a home run to fly ball ratio, which is nice, adding to that offensive production, which was already above average last year. So yeah, Jonah Heim made a really good impression, had a real hot start to the year last year, cooled off a little bit, but nonetheless was an above average hitter and won the Gold Glove while being neutral on the bases. So yeah, very good year from Jonah Heim. I imagine you have him a little bit higher, so you'll definitely get into him as well. So yeah. And now your number 5.
Yeah, so for number 5, I put a guy that I actually William Contreras from the Milwaukee Brewers. A lot of why I have him so high was the incredible progression he made defensively in his first full season. It was his first year of his career playing more than 100 games, and he played 141. And he went from being a negative defender on Fangraphs to being a plus 18 defensive runs above average defensive catcher, which was just a remarkable turnaround for him. In terms of framing, he went from the 20th percentile in 2022 to the 93rd percentile in 2023. In terms of blocking, he went from the 22nd percentile to the 90th percentile. So just a truly remarkable turnaround of catching for William Contreras defensively. The only reason I don't have him higher, given that sort of defensive value plus a 124 weighted runs created plus, is his batted ball profile. I think there are some concerns when you look at the fact that he had a 55% ground ball rate last year. You definitely want. I don't think there's any scenario where you want a guy to have a 55% ground ball rate, especially a guy that has a 91.3% or 91.3 mile per hour exit velocity and a 48.4% hard hit rate. So I'd need to see William Contreras lift the ball a little bit more. He only had a 20% fly ball rate last year and a 19.9% line drive rate. I would like to see both of those go up at least 5% in the next year. And I think I could put him a lot higher on this list if he does those things. And honestly, just to sum it up, a 26.9% sweet spot rate, 2nd percentile in the league. All his expected numbers were pretty far below what he actually did produce because of that. The one good thing he did, given this batted ball profile, was hit a lot of balls up the middle. Obviously, ground balls up the middle have a lot higher chance of being hits now, and they did in 2023. So that probably helped a lot with his expected numbers and his actual numbers. But I still would like to see him lift the ball a little more and ground out a little less.
Right. So yeah, my number 5 that's where I put Will Smith, different Will, but yeah, I have Will Smith number 5 here. So yeah, he's interesting because, like I said, after like 2020 when he had a great shortened season, and especially after 2021 when he had a very good full season, we were like, okay, this guy, he's really emerging. He's going to be one of the best catchers in baseball. And he's still, in my mind, a top 5 catcher, in your mind, a top 6 catcher. But it's not what we would have expected, a couple years ago. And that's largely because his offense has very slightly tapered off each of the last 2 seasons. Since 2021, his OPS plus has gone from 127 to 124 to 114, and his slugging has gone from 495 to 465 to 438. So yeah, and his home run total has gone from 25 to 24 to 19, all in pretty similar ballpark of of plate appearances, so it's not necessarily a playing time thing. And along with his offense slightly tapering off, his defense has stayed fairly neutral, so nothing to put against him, but also nothing to add to his case either. So yeah, a 119 OPS plus over the last 2 years with fairly neutral defense. Like, he's been pretty good, and that's why still have him as number 5. But yeah, he's definitely gone down the list over the past couple years. Who do you have as your number 4?
Number 4, I have Jonah Heim, and I think Jonah Heim is kind of how I talk about my hypothetical dream scenario for a guy like Patrick Bailey. Bailey actually had a higher defensive runs above average last year than Jonah Heim, despite about 40 less games played. But Jonah Heim has been a league average hitter, or right around a league average hitter, for the last couple of years now. 96 weighted runs created plus in 2022, 103 in 2023, and his expected numbers are kind of right with his actual numbers. His expected batting average was only 3 points lower than his actual. His expected slugging was 4 points lower than his actual. And not to mention, he doesn't strike out a whole lot. He walks a decent amount, a little below the league average at 8%, but for a catcher, I mean, you take that any single day. Yeah, and not to mention, he's been maybe the best defensive catcher in baseball over the last 3 seasons. Over 50 defensive runs above average over a 3-year span is pretty ridiculous. And he's been a league average hitter to go along with it. And I think he's becoming one of the most consistent guys in the league, you could almost say. I mean, defensively, he's certainly already there. But offensively, he pulls the ball a lot. He lifts the ball a lot. And if you do those things, you'll find your way into a lot of hits, no matter what your expected numbers say. So I put Jonah Heim at number 4. I mean, I think he's becoming a lot more consistent with it. And yeah, I mean, he's a very safe pick to accumulate a lot in every year now.
Yeah, for sure. And something that I really liked about him is that he's just made incremental offensive improvements to his game each of the last 2 years, which is very nice. So my number 4, this is where I have William Contreras, Wilson's brother, and your number 5 catcher. William Contreras, very interesting player, considering the all the variance that's going on here, like a randomly great defensive season, randomly high actual numbers over expected numbers. But just to break down William Contreras, over the last 2 years, he has a 130 OPS plus, and out of 24 catchers with 600 plus plate appearances in the last 2 years, he leads in OPS. Also from 2022 to 2023, his fielding run value went from -7 to +8. Shout out to Foolish Bailey. He has a little video dedicated to the quote unquote Brewers catching lab, where he talked about how the same thing pretty much happened to Omar Narvaez when he came to Milwaukee. So maybe there's an actual thing there. Maybe we can actually rely on those numbers for William Contreras. Along with that, William Contreras led all catchers in FWAR last year. And for me, why I don't have him higher is I'm just kind of waiting to make sure that defensive season is not an outlier, because single year defensive numbers can sometimes be a little bit wishy-washy, as we've mentioned before on these other positional rankings. So I'm just trying to make sure that he is an actual good defender and not just had a random very good season. Along with that, he's also, as you mentioned, he's also due to regress offensively. He has hit 302 on ground balls the last 2 years, which is very odd from a catcher because he doesn't have the speed to outrun for infield singles. And him hitting 302 on grounders has led to him having the 4th luckiest difference in batting average and expected batting average out of 110, and also the 4th luckiest difference batting average and expected batting average on ground balls out of 204. So he's been 4th luckiest in both. So he's due to regress a little bit. If he had a 130 OPS plus over the last 2 seasons and wasn't outperforming his expected numbers, I probably would have him a little bit higher. But I think that OPS plus number is due to regress a little bit. So that is my number 4. Who do you have as your number 3?
feel like we're gonna have the same top three in order. At number three, I have a guy that you drafted in the F4 League last year, which proved to be a winning move for Team Chris. I have Cal Raleigh as my number three catcher. And first of all, Cal Raleigh just absolutely refuses to put the ball on the ground or hit it anywhere other than right field, because he had a 50.8% pull rate last year, a 35.1% ground or fly ball rate, and only a 31.7% ground ball rate. Having a fly ball rate that's almost 4% above your ground ball rate is kind of unheard of, to be completely honest. And Cal Raleigh did it last year. He also did it to an even crazier extent in 2022, a 41.5% fly ball rate to a 29.6% ground ball rate. I just love that he refuses to hit the ball on the ground. Just to give you an idea, he had the second highest pulled fly ball rate in baseball, minimum 300 batted balls in 2023, behind only Max Muncy, right in front of Isaac Paredes. You know, Isaac Paredes has made his entire game about pulled fly balls, and Cal Raleigh actually does it at a higher rate. And not to mention, he's also an elite defensive catcher by any standard that you can pretty much look at. On Fangraphs, he has 82nd percentile framing. He has 87th percentile caught stealing above average. So he's good at throwing guys out. He's good at stealing strikes, as Foolish Baseball would put it. He could be better at blocking, and that's all right. But I mean, on Fangraphs, they also love him there. 20.7 defensive runs above average last year, 18 in 2022. Yeah, Cal Raleigh has been, you know, an automatic 4-win catcher for over the last couple of years now. Even with a high strikeout rate, and even with low batting averages, with below league average on base percentages, he's turned out an above average offensive season with elite defense every year.
Yes, 100%. Yeah, drafted him in F4. And the fun thing about drafting a very defensive oriented player is they could go 0 for 4 and there's like no change in their F4 the next day, which is pretty fun. Whereas if you're drafting, if you have like Pete Alonso in your lineup or Yandy Diaz, if they're 0 for 4, it's a rough day.
It's an automatic go down no matter what.
No matter what. But that's an aside. With Cal Raleigh, yeah, I have number 3 as well. And yeah, for many of the reasons you're talking about, he has a 116 OPS plus, the second most defensive runs above average, and third most F4 among catchers over the last 2 seasons. He also has the highest pulled fly ball rate the last 2 seasons out of 204 hitters. That's the highest rate of batted balls of which are pulled fly balls, and he also has the 5th highest rate of fly balls that were pulled out of 153. So due to outperform expected numbers a little bit because he pulls so many fly balls, you know, hits a lot of fly balls to shorter areas of the ballpark. So yeah, and that's led to him hitting a lot of home runs. He hit 30 home runs last year, 27 the year before, while being an elite defender, definitely a Gold Glove candidate each of the past 2 years. So yeah, I mean, his high offense production for the position, along with great defense, definitely puts him top 3 for me, as well as you. So now on to the number 2 catcher in baseball for 2024.
So at number 2, I think a lot of people are going to have this guy number 1, although I don't think you're going to. But I did put Adley Rutschman as my number 2 catcher. The only reason I didn't put him number 1 was because there was a slight regression last year, both in defense and in base running. Otherwise, I would have probably easily put him number 1, but he did a little worse in both of those things in a larger sample size last year. But I mean, let's talk about what he did extremely well, right? He has a really, really good batted ball profile for someone of I guess his hitting caliber. You know, he doesn't hit the ball super hard, but he places it very well. He has a 37% sweet spot rate. With that result, because of that, he had a 95th percentile expected batting average at 292, a 469 expected slugging, which was about 35 points above his actual number. He doesn't strike out. He doesn't chase. He doesn't whiff. And he walks a lot, 13.4%. He almost walked as much as he struck out last year. And, you know, he may have regressed on defense, but he's still very good at it. He was above average in every Statcast defensive catcher metric that there is. He was above average on every Fangraphs defensive catcher metric that there is. He is still an elite defensive catcher, even if he did it a little bit better in 2022. And there certainly is the potential for him to put it all together next year, and I'm very excited to see if he can do that. But he's going into his second full season now. You could really even say his third full season because 2022, he had 470 plate appearances. He was very close to the qualifier. But I mean, Adley Rutschman has been everything that the Orioles had hoped he would be when they drafted him in 2019, when they called him up in 2022, everything in between that, and I have him as the number 2 catcher.
Yeah, it seems like Adley Rutschman's progression has been completely linear, which is very rare. Like it seemed like he was the number 1 draft pick. He was probably like ranked top 10, then eventually ranked top 2, then eventually ranked the best prospect in baseball, then came up and was second in Rookie of the Year. Maybe would have won it if he started the season with the Orioles. He just hasn't missed a beat at all, which is very, very cool. Yeah, my number 2 is actually Sean Murphy.
Wow, you're like the Sean Murphy guy though.
I was in the all MLB underrated team. However, I think part of what changed this might have been when we recorded that. After we recorded that, I think Rutschman went on a great run,
and Sean Murphy went into a huge slump.
Went into a very bad slump. I think his last 17 games, he had a sub 500 OPS or something like that. But also, I think there's just a little bit more reflection to be done. And also, this is a projection of 2024, and I think Adley Rutschman can make some more. He has a higher ceiling, which kind of gives me his number 1 status. Not to spoil it.
I thought you were good. I thought that's where you had Francisco Alvarez or Jake Rogers.
Yeah. Yeah. I had Connor Wong up there. I really appreciated the interview that we had. But Sean Murphy, number 2, still, awesome catcher. Over the last 2 years, he has a 123 OPS plus, the 3rd most defensive runs above average, and the 2nd most FWAR among catchers over the last 2 seasons. He underperformed his expected numbers, but I think part of that had to do with where he was hitting his fly balls. He only pulled 23% of his fly balls last year and sent 44% of them straight away, which was the sixth highest rate out of 153. The league has slugged 1724 on pulled fly balls in the last 2 years and 569 on straightaway fly balls. So that has led to him having worse results on the fly balls. So with Sean Murphy, why I think I have him below Adley Rutschman is just because Adley Rutschman actually does have more FWAR over the last 2 years, and also Adley Rutschman is younger and I think has a little bit of a higher ceiling, and I think some of those either base running or defensive regressions could have been potential outliers, so he might be growing his game a little bit further. So what is your case for Sean Murphy as the best catcher in baseball for 2024?
Yeah. I think on a rate basis, I really liked Sean Murphy's 2023 a lot more than Adley Rutschman's. Sean Murphy had almost 250 less plate appearances. He had 438 compared to Rutschman's 687. He only lost to him in F4 by 0.9. He slightly edged him out in weighted runs created plus 129 to 127. Every expected metric was pretty awesome, and I know that the reason you obviously explained the reason why he didn't perform up to his expected numbers was because he hit a lot of balls straight away, and the expected numbers don't account for that. But there is something to be said, I think, about a 525 expected slugging from the catcher position, a 15% barrel rate from the catcher position. I mean, Sean Murphy hits the ball hard. He hits it in the sweet spot 36.3% of the time. He walks a lot, and he is the best blocker in baseball. He was last year, 15 blocking runs above average. He was 84th percentile or higher in every Statcast defensive metric. He had double the amount of defensive runs above average compared to Adley Rutschman, despite much less time behind the plate. And I think Sean Murphy has a great chance of doing that again next year. I think obviously you mentioned the improvement that needs to be made was the spraying of his fly balls a little more to left field rather than center. But I think last year at least there was a pretty drastic difference between the two of them in fielding, and I think offensively they were kind of very similar. So the defensive edge really put Murphy above and beyond for me. But I mean, yeah, there is an easy case to be made for either one as the number one catcher.
Yeah, right. And also, we mentioned Sean Murphy's expected numbers. He also led catchers in OPS among catchers with 600 plus plate appearances, or not 600 plus, 400 plus plate appearances last year. Sean Murphy had the highest OPS. So it's not just that we're relying on expected numbers. He does have quite the pedigree in the on the surface numbers as well. So yeah, Adley Rutschman. I have Adley Rutschman number one. And maybe those F4 numbers are skewed a little bit by him just playing more than Sean Murphy did last year, but I think that also has its own value in it as well. But Adley Rutschman over the last 2 years has a 129 OPS plus and the most F4 among catchers over the last 2 seasons. Out of 24 catchers with 600 plus plate appearances in the last few years, he is third in OPS, second in walk to strikeout ratio, and leads in on-base percentage and weighted runs created plus. And he's also fourth in BSR because of his 49% extra base taken rate over the last 2 seasons. He also leads catchers. He also leads all catchers over the last 2 years in both hits and walks. So that's where that on-base percentage definitely comes in. Also last year, he was 90th percentile or higher in strikeout rate, walk rate, whiff rate, expected batting average, and expected WOBA. And he also has a plus 17 fielding run value over the last 2 years. So yeah, and he is heading into his age 26 season, I believe, maybe 27, but still a pretty young player who has very, very good underlying numbers with himself, just great strikeout to walk numbers. I think fairly average like exit velocity numbers, but this with how often he's putting the ball in play, he's due to have very good offensive results, which he has had, a 129 OPS plus over the last 2 seasons, along with very positive base running and defense. So yeah, that's my case for Adley Rutschman as the best catcher for 2024. This might be only like the second time we've had a different number one. Because
let me go through the lists in my head.
Because yeah, it's been Corbin Carroll for left field, Aaron Judge for center field, Ronald Acuna Jr. for right field. We had different starting pitchers, which is due to happen.
You had Strider and I had Wheeler.
I had Fried and you had
Fried. You had Fried and I had Wheeler. Yeah.
And then third base was Jose Ramirez. We both had, and first base was Freddie Freeman. So only the second time we have a different number one. Not bad. But I think a lot of these are pretty consensus. Especially like first base, center field. Like that's definitely the case. So, all right. So now on to.
Wait, we gotta review our lists.
Yeah, our 10 through 1. Because yeah, we definitely had some discrepancies. I had some guys on my list that you didn't have. You had some.
Yeah, I will say Yainer Diaz was my 11. Wilson Contreras was probably my 12 as well.
Right.
Jake Rogers was like your 23.
I don't know. I just list out my 10 and
yeah,
I think I don't really rank after that. I'm like, oh, this guy was in consideration, but I don't know. So yeah, my number 10 was let me get back to my list here. Or yeah, 10 through 1. My number 10 was Yainer Diaz. Number 9, Patrick Bailey. 8, Wilson Contreras. 7, JT Realmuto. 6, Jonah Heim. 5, Will Smith. 4, William Contreras. 3, Cal Raleigh. 2, Sean Murphy. 1, Adley Rutschman. What is your 10 through 1?
Yeah, so at number 10, I put Jake Rogers. At number 9, JT Realmuto. Number 8, Patrick Bailey. Number 7, Francisco Alvarez. Number 6, Will Smith. Number 5, William Contreras. Number 4, Jonah Heim. Number 3, Cal Raleigh. Number 2, Adley Rutschman. And number 1, I had Sean Murphy.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, now we will get on to the captains of the infield. the shortstop position, which, yeah, the theme of today's episode is definitely like defensive value, because
Definitely is.
both
Yeah.
positions have tremendous defensive value, and a lot of like not a lot of lists can you have like average or below average offensive players on a top 10 list, but catcher and shortstop, there's going to be a couple that are like that. So on so yeah, I'll start with the shortstop, since you started with the catchers, and this take, it might be a hot take. I don't think it, just based on his numbers last year, I don't think it's really a hot take really at all. But it might be seen as this based on the namesake. But at my number 10, I have Carlos Correa. He's another guy who just had a very weird year last year, and I don't know how much that has to do with his injury last year, and I don't know if that injury is going to linger on to this year, so I have to be hesitant on him for 2024. But in 2023, for non-2020 seasons, he suffered career lows in average on-base percentage, slugging, OPS, BSR, and wins above replacement. The reason why I am having him top 10 is, given his 134 OPS plus the previous 2 years in fairly neutral defense, I think he's due to bounce back a little bit and be a solid shortstop, be like a three win, maybe 4-win season. He could get back to that 6-win status, who knows? But for now, my optimism, albeit is a little bit shaky, I still have some optimism for Carlos Correa and him bouncing back from a below average offensive season, as well as a horrible base running season and a pretty neutral defensive season. So who do you have as your number 10?
So at number 10, I have another guy that maybe is a surprise given the numbers he put up next year, but I have JP Crawford from the Seattle Mariners. I think results wise, JP Crawford was more than the 10th best catcher in 2023. But this list is supposed to be going into 2024, and a lot of his season just has the feels of, we're going to look back at 2023 as JP Crawford's career year. He put up 4.9 FWAR in 638 plate appearances. And he kind of has the these sort of Isaac Paredes, Lane Thomas sort of build, where he accumulates a lot of stats despite not as good expected numbers, specifically on the slugging side of things, because he hits a lot of fly balls and he pulls the ball a lot. He had a 43.5% pull rate last year, a 23.7% fly ball rate, which is around the league average. But I think anecdotally, he hit 19 home runs last year after not hitting more than double digits at any other year of his career, I believe, which was dope. And I think that was kind of just, he pulled a bunch of fly balls and found his way into it, because, he only had a 16th percentile barrel rate last year, only 4.8%, 3.1 barrels per plate appearances. He also was very shaky on defense. He had -8 outs above average, which is, to be honest, kind of on par with where he's been for a lot of his career. It's actually a slight improvement over 2022. And Fangraphs kind of agreed. He was a negative defensive runs average, above average rather, which is really not a good look at the shortstop position, because it is a position where it is a little bit easier to accumulate defensive runs above average. So it feels like he's a bit due for regression offensively. The defense is a bit shaky, but he does walk at an incredible rate. He's very good with swing decisions. Yeah, he's elite with swing decisions. 95th percentile chase rate, 86th percentile whiff rate, and only a 19.6% strikeout rate. All of those very good. And again, a 14.7% walk rate is elite. So there are a lot of things JP Crawford does well, but there is, I think, some reason for skepticism as well.
Right. So now on to my number 9, which is Willy Adames, who I kind of prefaced earlier in the show talking about the Brewers lineup. Willy Adames is an interesting player. Over the last 2 seasons, he has a 103 OPS plus and the second most defensive runs above average and 7th most FWAR among shortstops. He had a 95 OPS plus last year, which is obviously 5% below league average. but he's due to have just better offensive results. He had the 5th unluckiest difference in batting average and expected batting average out of 129, and the 7th unluckiest WOBA and expected WOBA difference. So I could see him easily being an above average bat once again, while being a pretty like gold glove quality defender. I mean, second most defensive runs above average over the last 2 seasons is nothing to scoff at all. And I was very close to putting him number 8, but just for whatever reason, I think just put him number 9. And yeah, I think there's a lot of I think there's some optimism to be had with Willy Adames, who's kind of had a little bit of a career renaissance since going to the Brewers. Who do you have as your number 9?
We're actually doubling up here. I also put Willy Adames as my number 9 shortstop, so we agree on that. Yeah, I mean, Willy Adames is an elite defensive shortstop. He has about like what 30, close to like 25, actually 25 to 30 defensive runs above average over the last 2 seasons. And yeah, he's been an average offensive bat. He was slightly below average last year, and his expected numbers do suggest he's due for a little bit better. His expected batting average was 23 points lower than his actual batting average, or 23 points higher, excuse me, than his actual batting average. His expected slugging was 29 points higher than his actual slugging. So, there is potential that he can get back to being an average offensive bat, maybe even slightly above average. But there are some things that I don't like about Willy Adames last year, and one of them, the most of which, was that his average exit velocity dipped by 1.5 miles an hour. And I know that doesn't seem like a lot, but over the course of 400 batted balls, which he has pretty much in each of the last 2 seasons, that's not a very good thing. An 87.4% exit velocity is not good for somebody who has a 31.5% fly ball rate. You will find your way into 24 home runs like he did last year. But, in terms of rate stats, it's only going to hurt you. That's a large part of the reason his OPS has dropped over 100 points between 2021 and 2023, where he instead had an 89.5 average exit velocity compared to 87.4. So that 2 miles an hour, that makes essentially a 100 OPS difference. So, I mean, I like the batted ball profile, but I don't like it with that exit velocity combination. And that is actually a case where you either need to hit the ball on the ground a tiny bit more, or really just hit line drives, because a 22.3% line drive rate is something that I would like to see go up from Willy Adames. I'd like to see him definitely above the league average at least, but I would like to see it in like the 26 to 27 range, if that's how hard he's going to be hitting the ball. But he's an elite defender, so I do have him at number 9.
Yeah, Willy Adames, shout out, getting some top 10 recognition. Number 8, I have JP Crawford. Yeah, interesting player to look at, because last year definitely seems like a weird outline season in a positive direction. He had an offensive renaissance last year. From 2022 to 2023, he increased his average exit velocity from 85.1 miles per hour to 88.3 miles per hour. 3.2 mile per hour difference in 1 year is pretty astounding. He also increased his fly ball rate from 18% to 24%, his pull rate from 34% to 43%, and he decreased his ground ball rate from 47% to 40%. That was all while leading the American League in walks, which is pretty astounding. You mentioned that walk rate, it's over 14%, which is really, really good. And his OPS plus, which is, the on the surface non-expected number, that jumped from 100, which is an average hitter, to 131, which is 31% above average. And that resulted in him being 5th among MLB shortstops in F4 last year, and 2nd in offensive runs above average. The reason I don't have him higher is I need to see him do that again in order to be, that top 6, top 5 status, where he was last year, 5th most F4 among MLB shortstops last year. So if he does that again, he rises up the list. But that does seem, these numbers do seem very weird, and we could be seeing this as that player who had that one season. If he could be in part 2 that of that draft. So who knows? But overall, just like looking at everything underlying and on the surface, just went up last year for him last year. and I think he's heading into his age 29 season, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, it seems like good things could be ahead for JP Crawford in the middle or at the top of that Mariners lineup. Who do you have number 8?
Yeah, so we agreed on number 9 and we swapped our 8s and 10s because I have Carlos Correa in my 8. And yeah, I mean, what a wretched season it was for him. A negative 9.2 BSR, a 96 weighted runs created plus, a sub 400 slugging percentage. Uh, yeah, I mean, only a 1.1 F4. It was really, really bad. It was just not a good season for Carlos Correa. But he did keep right around the same batted ball profile. He did. I mean, other than the fact that his ground ball rate and fly ball rate swapped 4% each, that's definitely not a great thing. But he kept the same exit velocity. Um, he did decrease a few things there, but I mean, I still think it is only one a down year, and I'm still open to the idea that he could rebound and get back to what he used to be, or at least much closer to that than what he was last year. I also kind of just want to give him the benefit of the doubt of he was coming off of a really crazy offseason personally, and maybe he just wasn't mentally there. I don't know. It's obviously very hard to say. But I feel like he's going into this year, not having gone through that crazy offseason where he signed with, or he agreed to terms with 2 different teams, had them back out because of health reasons, only to, lose out on 6 years and like $200 million, in contract negotiations. And I want to believe that there'll be more of a fresh start coming into this spring training for him. So maybe this pick is more based on vibes than anything else, but I did put him at number 8, and I really am open to the idea that he's going to be a 3 to 4 win player at the very least again next season.
Yeah, sometimes you got to go with the vibes. Sometimes the vibes lead you in the right direction. Yeah, and with Carlos Correa like that, those base running numbers are a little bit of an outlier because I don't think he's going to ground into 30 double plays again, because I don't think he's going to have a 70% ground ball rate with a runner on first and less than 2 outs again, because that was crazy how it was 70% in those situations and 40% in all other situations. Like that is something I can't imagine that happens once again. So I think those base running numbers will go up, and also he was a premier hitter before last year, and that could easily get back. He could easily get back to that. Hopefully that foot and ankle are in good shape. So yeah, now on to my number 7, which is where I put Bo Bichette, who, I mean, one of the best offensive players at this position, and I think some people might have me underrating him a little bit. But over the last 2 seasons, he has a 126 OPS plus, also the 6th most F4 among current shortstops, and the 2nd highest weighted runs created plus. That's just the league adjusted and park adjusted offensive statistic that accounts for a lot of different things. He had the 2nd highest weighted runs created plus among 30 primary shortstops with 800 plus plate appearances over the last 2 seasons. What's a good sign with Bo Bichette is he increased his line drive rate 6.3 percentage points from 2022 to 2023. And out of 81 hitters with 400 plus batted balls in 2023, his line drive rate ranked 2nd behind Luis Arraez, who was the batting title winner in the National League. Also with Bo Bichette, very good underlying offensive numbers as well. He was 88th percentile in expected WOBA and 98th percentile in expected batting average. So yeah, at the plate, he's been very, very good. Where I'm a little bit concerned and why I might have him below some of these guys is he's been unfortunately losing speed the last 2 years, just statistically in feet per second, and he's not been stealing as many bases despite the rule changes. He's gone from 25 stolen bases on 26 attempts to 13 stolen bases, and now and this past year 5 stolen bases despite the rule change. So he's not as much of a factor with base running, and not as complete of a player as he was 2 years ago, albeit probably the same hitter. But yeah, who do you have as your number 7?
At number 7, this is where I put Xander Bogaerts. who had pretty much by all accounts his worst offensive season since 2017 in 2023 in his first season with the Padres. He had his lowest batting average since then, his lowest on base percentage since then, his lowest slugging since then, and then by association his lowest OPS and also his lowest weighted runs created plus, despite the ballpark change that worked a little more in his favor. He also had his first negative BSR season since 2018. And from a batted ball standpoint, he had his highest ground ball rate since 2015. He had a 49.8% ground ball rate last year, which I don't love. He had his lowest line drive rate since 2016. So there are a lot of places where he kind of regressed offensively last year. Just kind of going uh, by by the basic stuff, right? I mean, his expected batting average was only 252, the lowest it's been again since 2017. He was also, he only had a 27% sweet spot rate, which is like not the hitter that he's been. It's not the hitter that we know Xander Bogaerts to be. We kind of know him to be the guy that hits a lot of flares and a lot of good base hits the opposite way. But he didn't really do that to the same degree in his first year in San Diego. So I do worry that this could maybe be a trend with Xander Bogaerts. I think it's always concerning when you see someone regress in that many categories in just 1 year. He's also, now officially on the wrong side of 30, right? He's going into his age 31 season next year. And by all means, he could bring it back in 2024. But, I think the shortstop is a very strong position. And given what we saw with Xander Bogaerts last year, I think it's fair to say that there are 6 shortstops ahead of him.
Yeah, Xander Bogaerts, I've always found it weird to evaluate him because, he all of a sudden had a defensive renaissance like in the middle of the career, which is very rare. And then, and he just always outperforms his expected numbers. But yeah, he's a very interesting player. My number 6 is Trey Turner, who I was very high on last year. I thought he was a top 5 player in the game. He unfortunately was not. But yeah, I think based on the way he closed out last year, I mean, still a very, very good player. Over the last 2 years, just looking at the long-term scale, he has a 118 OPS plus, the 5th most FWAR among shortstops, and the 2nd most BSR among shortstops. That's base running runs, counts for stolen bases, extra base taken, and just how often you get yourself out on the bases. And part of the reason why his BSR is so high is last season he was 30 for 30 on stolen bases, which is pretty astounding. Along with that, in his final 47 games last year, he hit 331 with a 1069 OPS. However, that was preceded by a pretty, like a 4-month slump from him, which was pretty unfortunate. And his overall hitting production has been going down since 2021. His whiff rate and strikeout rate have increased in both 2022 and 2023, and his average on-base percentage, slugging, and OPS have all decreased. So that's why I have him lower than I would have had him, in a 2022 rank or a 2023 rank, just because I think his overall hitting production is going down, albeit still a very good player, which is why I have number 6. Who do you have as your number 6?
At number 6, this is where I put Bo Bichette. You had him in your 7. And I have him in my 6th. And, I think the decline in sprint speed is fair. I think the defense is also a fair point because it's not perfect. But I think batted ball wise, he might have had his best season, or at least his best full season in his career. He had a 312 expected batting average, which is a full season high, actually just a career high in general for him, which is 98th percentile, just to give you an idea of what that is. I think it's very easy to see Bo Bichette and think of, of high batting average, high line drives and whatnot. But he put up a 504 expected slugging last year. That's 90th percentile. And he, more importantly, had a 30% line drive rate, which was up over 6% from 2022. Which, if you're a guy like Bo Bichette, you want to just hit as many line drives as possible. Kind of like what I said with Willy Adames earlier. This is what you want to be as a hitter if you're not going to have the most power. And Bo Bichette, probably not the most powerful guy in the field, especially on the Blue Jays, but he maximized his potential. I think with this batted ball profile, maybe he could have used a couple extra fly balls and a couple less ground balls. But other than that, I think he has a really good offensive profile. I think he fits what he should be doing. The only thing he could do is chase a little less, walk a lot more, and then the defense and base running are not the best, sure, but I think he's very good at offense and he does what he should be doing.
Right. So yeah, just one spot off with us. My number 5 is Xander Bogaerts. A lot of it is simply like track record. He's been very consistently, at least a 4-win player, at times a 6-win player, or at least around there. With Xander Bogaerts, he has a 125 OPS plus and the third most F4 among shortstops over the last 2 years, which is very, very good, being top 3 in F4 at the position over a 2-year span. And why I don't have him in that top 3 is because his average exit velocity, barrel rate, and slugging have been consistently dropping. His power numbers are just overall down, which just brings down his general offense production. However, he is one of those players, one of those really rare players that can consistently outperform his expected numbers. His expected numbers were actually pretty bad last year, but he was still able to put up a 120 OPS plus. He just, I don't know what it is about him. I don't know if he plans on doing this, but he just seems to do pretty well on ground balls and maybe just placing them or just finding a way to get infield hits as a guy who isn't necessarily known for his speed, not slow, but not known for his speed. As he is tied for the most hits with a projected distance of 4 feet or fewer over the last 2 years. Usually that would be reserved for the Corbin Carrolls, Trey Turner, Bobby Witt Jr., John Birdie types. But Xander Bogaerts is that guy who just hits the ball very, very at a very, very short distance, but is able to get hits out of them for whatever reason. Also, an interesting thing about Xander Bogaerts is, at least outs above average wise, he proved last year he is a positive defender. He was consistently a negative defender with the Red Sox, but in his contract year, he improved his defense pretty dramatically. And I thought maybe that could have been an outline season, but at least according to outs above average, he was still a positive defender with the Padres. So, overall, that track record and that defensive improvement keeps him in the top 5 for me. Who do you have as your number 5 shortstop?
Yeah, number 5. This is where I put Trey Turner. You put him as your number 6. So we were one spot off on both Trey Turner and on who was the guy that I just put at 6?
Bo Bichette.
Bo Bichette, thank you. I think if we did this list last year, we would have probably both put Trey Turner in the 1 for shortstops, but he did regress quite heavily last season, and we now have him. You have him in your 6. I have him in my 5. Base running wise, he is very much still there. He hasn't gone anywhere, and he's approaching 50 career BSR, which he's likely going to hit at age 31, which is pretty impressive. Defensively, he did regress quite some last year. He became around a league average defender, according to Fangraphs, below average on Baseball Savant. I still think he did a lot of things well last year. He has a fine enough average exit velocity. He's like a little bit above average, and he hit a lot more fly balls last year. Maybe he is a guy that should be hitting more ground balls, oddly enough. It's hard to say that about people, but for a guy that hit a lot more fly balls, he also hit a lot more balls straight away. That's not a good combo, like I mentioned earlier. He went from having a 41.4% pull rate in 2022 to a 35.9% pull rate in 2023, and his straight away percentage went from 34.7% to 40.6%. So certainly, there's a lot to be desired in his batted ball placement to go along with his batted ball profile. But I still think he's very good. He's stayed right around where he was in 2022 in terms of expected slugging, expected batting average, hard hit rate, exit velocity, walk rate. His strikeout rate did go up a couple points, but overall he's still there in a lot of components, and I think he finished strong last year, like you mentioned, and I feel like he can use that as momentum going into 2024 because there is kind of a stigma around your first year playing in a large market like Philadelphia, under a big contract. And, I think he was feeling that for some time, but after the, very famously after that standing ovation, he brought it back. So I'm pretty optimistic that Trey Turner can sort of bring it back next year.
Yeah, really, really appreciated the Philadelphia fan base. It helped me out a tremendous bit.
Yeah,
That's the
they
legendary.
got it. They got to get a ring.
Yeah, they it's not the ring they were looking for, but they will get a ring. My so now on to my number 4. Some people may have him ranked higher based on what he did last year. Some people may have him ranked lower because it was just one season. But I have Bobby Witt Jr. at my number 4. I know MLB Network has him very, very low. I think he's number 9 on their
Which is
list.
disgusting.
It's pretty wild. So with Bobby Witt Jr., why I have him ranked as high as he is, he had the 3rd most F4 among shortstops last year. And from July on, he led shortstops in F4 and had the 6th most in MLB at any position, which is very, very impressive. And from July on, he hit 310 with a 929 OPS and stole 26 bases in 77 games. So yeah, I mean, he was, according to F4, the 6th best player in baseball from July on, albeit that is 3 months. So with Bobby Witt Jr., part of why I may hesitate to put him higher is I feel a little bit weird about his defense. Like if you just look at outs above average, he made a dramatic improvement, but I don't know if that's going to sustain itself because it was a 25 out jump. He went from negative 11 outs above average to plus 14 from 2022 to 2023, but defensive runs saved had him as a negative. They had him at -6. So that's a 20 out/run difference, according to outs above average and defensive runs saved. So I'm curious. Like, I think 2024 is going to clear up some questions with his defense for me. I feel like those numbers are not going to be as different. So if he is at that plus 14 level that outs above average has him at, I think he is easily one of the best shortstops in the game. Just have to make sure that sustains itself before I put him any higher. So yeah, Bobby Witt Jr. is my number 4. Who do you have as your number 4?
My number 4, I have a guy that, unlike Trey Turner, was absolutely phenomenal in the first year of his big contract. Talking about Dansby Swanson, who put up an excellent season for the Cubs, a 4.9 Fangraphs wins above replacement. He had a random defensive jump in 2022, and I think a lot of people were figuring, all right, contract year, fluke. And no, he did the exact same thing in 2023. He put up 20.3 defensive runs above average. He put up 19 outs above average, which was, I think, like the 2nd most behind Brenton Doyle in the entire major leagues, or something like that. So, I mean, an absolutely phenomenal defensive season from Dansby Swanson. And in terms of offense, I think the funny thing about him is like he might be the most average guy offensively in terms of batted ball profile. The MLB average ground ball rate is 44.6%. His last year was 44.1%. The average fly ball rate is 23.5%. His was 25.2%. The average line drive rate is 24.9%. His was 24.2%. And the average pop fly rate is 7%. His was 6.5%. So he's very, very average on the batted ball metrics. The thing about playing in Wrigley is I don't really know like what you're supposed to do in terms of where you hit the ball because if you pull it or if you go to the opposite field, there's that random deeper part of the wall in both left and right, and obviously you never want to go straight away. But Dansby did pull the ball over 4% more last year than he did in 2022, and it resulted in some high expected slugging numbers compared to where he actually was. But in expected batting average, he was pretty similar. In terms of striking out, he did do that quite a bit, but he actually does that. He's kind of always been a high strikeout guy. He did walk a lot more last year than he has in the past, which I like. But overall, I mean, he's been somewhat average offensively throughout much of his career, but he's been a standout defensively, and he's also been a very consistent standout on the bases, at least 3 BSR in every season, including 2020, since 2018. So I have Dansby Swanson in my 4.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, Wrigley can be pretty weird, and it's good for hitters to hit it in that blurred line of like pulled / straight away, like that left center field, right center
Yeah,
field, because some of those might be considered straight away, which is actually like, okay, it might be good to hit it straight away here because that's technical. It's like 368 to left center, which is like very, very short. There's a lot of there were a couple home runs that we watched where it was like home run in 1 out of 30 ballparks, and that one ballpark is Wrigley Field. So yeah, the you know, it's a 110-year-old ballpark now, so
yeah.
things can get pretty weird. But Dansby Swanson is my number 3 on this list. Just a lot of it is partially due to track record, and like that 2023 kind of confirmed, like, okay, this guy is a really, really good shortstop. I was actually kind of critical of fans being angry that the Red Sox didn't get Dansby Swanson, because I thought that was kind of a fluke year in 2022, but he ended up getting another 4-win season, almost 5-win season this past year. And in the last 2 seasons, he leads all players in defensive runs above average and outs above average, and also has a 106 OPS plus and a 56% extra base taken rate. That's pretty phenomenal. That's 14 percentage points above the 2023 MLB league average. That leads to him having the second most F4 among shortstops since 2022. So yeah, I think he's been a phenomenal defender, while being an above average hitter and very, very good base runner. And I think, with him doing it 2 years in a row, that proved to me he is one of the best shortstops in the game, and someone to keep an eye on moving forward. So yeah, now who is your number 3?
And number 3, this might be a hot take. It was certainly a hot take from me because I fully expected to have this guy in the 2. I'm going with Francisco Lindor in my 3. I came into this episode fully prepared to put him in the 2, and I ended up putting him in the 3, not as any indictment on him, but just because of how impressed I am by the person I ended up putting in my 2, and I'm sure you can probably guess who that is. But Francisco Lindor is, I think, very disrespected in general. I think he took a lot of heat in the first few months of his Mets tenure, and no one has really recognized what he's been since then. He's put up back-to-back 6-win seasons playing in New York. He's been pretty much what they asked for offensively, a 120 OPS, weighted runs created plus in both seasons, elite defense. And last year he had by far, in fact, the last 2 years, he's arguably had his 2 best base running seasons, his first and third best in BSR. So he's just been, absolutely tremendous. As far as last year, there were a couple slight concerns. He is popping the ball up a lot more since 2021, or since 2020, I guess. His pop-up rate has gone from 4.6% to 10.4%, and it's gone up about 2% every year. He did have a lot more fly balls last year, which is good because he also had a jump in exit velocity, although he did also have a career high in strikeout rate, which granted it's only 19.9%, which is still not a lot, but it is still a career high. But yeah, I do think Lindor takes a lot of heat that maybe he doesn't deserve playing in the New York market, but I think he handles it extremely well. And I think he goes out there and plays like the guy, this time last year when Ahmed Rosario and Andres Jimenez were both part of the youth movement that led Cleveland to the playoffs, there were conversations about, did Cleveland win this trade? Did the Mets, give up too much to get this guy? We're not having those conversations anymore. Anyone who tries to even entertain those conversations is a lunatic nowadays, right? Rosario's off the team. Jimenez, regressed a lot last year, and Lindor put up the same season that he did in 2022. So I have him in my 3. He could be number 1 at many other positions given his talent. But I do think there are 2 shortstops better than him as of right now, going into 2024.
Right. So yeah, that that opens the door for me to talk about Francisco Lindor a little bit more. I have him as my number 2, and I think the gap between number 1 and number 2 is not as far as like the offensive numbers would suggest. Like obviously the guy above, Francisco Lindor, had one of the greatest, one of the best offensive seasons in baseball last year. But like Francisco Lindor, what makes him so exceptional is how awesome he is at every part of the game. So just overall in the last 2 seasons, he has a 122 OPS plus and the most FWAR among shortstops. And along with that, and why I talk about why he's awesome in every part of the game is over these last 2 years, he's top 5 among shortstops in batting run value, base running runs, and defensive runs above average. There's no part of his game that really is weak. There's nothing that's really penetrable. So that's what kind of makes him as great as he is. And he's just been very, very consistent as well. Even his down years have been very, very good years. And in 2023 alone, he had increases in average exit velocity, barrel rate, sweet spot rate, fly ball rate, and line drive rate. And yeah, so that's why I really like him for 2023. And also what I may have against him a little bit is, according to outs above average, his defense has been declining. He's gone from, a great like Gold Glove contender to, albeit a very good, but not as great defender. It's gone from, I think, 21 to 12 to 6 is where his outs above average is. Although I really like, I really like his game because he is so good at every part of the game. And there's nothing you can really complain about when it comes to Francisco Lindor. Yeah, now on to your number 2.
Yeah, so my number 2, this is in fact where I put Bobby Witt Jr. You had him understandably in your 4. And I was expecting to have him in my 3 when I came in. But I looked as much as I could at everything, and I decided to pull the trigger and put him up there in the in the 2. I think what we saw out of him from July on is a lot closer to who he is than the way he played before July of last year. From July 28th to the end of the season, Bobby Witt Jr. slashed 323, 369, 598 for a 156 weighted runs created plus. And with elite defense, he had a 3.3 FWAR. That tied him for 4th most in the majors, behind only Mookie Betts, Ronald Acuna Jr., and Matt Olson, all of which were MVP candidates last season. Not to mention he plays elite defense, like I said, at shortstop. He is perhaps the best base runner in the league, or at least a top 5 base runner in the league. He has 100th percentile sprint speed. He had 100th percentile base running run value last year, and he had 7 BSR. In fact, he has 13.8 BSR in just the first 2 years of his career. I know you mentioned the defense and the way it swayed from 2022 to 23. I do think 2023 is closer to who he is. I think he's one of those guys where, he's still only going into his age 23 season, right? Like you and I think, are both older than Bobby Witt Jr., or at least I definitely am. I was a senior in high school when he was a senior in high school, and I remember watching a video that like MLB Network did with him before the draft. And that wasn't that long ago at this point. So, he took some time to adjust, but I feel like he's there now. The one thing that he really struggled to do before July of this year was hit fastballs, right? He hit 227 with a 402 slugging percentage against four-seam fastballs in 2022. And overall this year, he hit 262 with a 524 slugging, which is pretty good, but definitely there's a lot better. From July 28th on, like I mentioned, he hit 317 and slugged 698 against four-seam fastballs. So I feel like there's a lot of improvement coming with Bobby Witt Jr. this year. I think he's going to be an MVP candidate coming into this season. And I think that this is going to be the true breakout of Bobby Witt Jr. coming in 2024. And I have him in my 2.
Yeah. It's a good Bobby Witt Jr. little campaign speech there. I think you're almost selling me there. Like that was really well put
Listen,
together.
like I said, I came into this episode ready to put him in the 3 behind Lindor. And like I said, I did put Lindor in the 3, and that is not a knock on him. I was just so impressed with my research on Bobby Witt Jr. that I kind of talked myself into it.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, now on to the number 1 shortstop. I imagine we both have him here, but yeah, it's Corey Seager. And yeah, a lot of this just has to do with a crazy jump in production and how awesome he was last year. Most of these guys on the list, I'm judging on a 2-year scale. And I kind of am with Corey Seager as well, but there's just a lot of reasons to suggest why he's going to continue his excellence from 2023 to 2024. So yeah, last year he was second among all hitters in slugging and OPS, and he was 98th or 99th percentile in all expected categories. He had 18 more batting run value than the next best shortstop, according to Fangraphs, and he was also positive in outs above average and defensive runs saved. Only thing you can really complain about is the base running. I think that was maybe a little bit of an outlying season. I don't know what was going on there. He did have a hamstring issue. I'm hoping that's not necessarily going to linger, but it obviously didn't have any effect on his hitting, as he had I think it was a 10-13 OPS or something like that. OPS plus in the either upper 160s or low 170s, and was so much better than the next best hitting shortstop that I have to put him as my number one. And yeah, I mean, the underlying stuff just matches up. His average exit velocity and barrel rate were also astounding. Like, it was very comparative to the Shohei Ohtanis and Aaron Judges of the world, which obviously puts you very, very in a very, very high regard. So yeah, who's your number one?
Yeah, I mean, my number one, of course, is also Corey Seager. You know, in the age of guys like Shohei Ohtani and Aaron Judge with the run he went on in 2022, he had one of those in a normal year. He would have won MVP type seasons. People said it with Vlad Jr. in 2021. And I feel like Corey Seager had one of those in 2023, even with, some missed time due to injury. He still put up a 169 weighted runs created plus, like you mentioned, a 10-13 OPS. And it really felt like the season that we've been waiting for Corey Seager to have for years now, because he's had some excellent offensive spurts in otherwise injury-riddled seasons. You could point to a 149. Well, wasn't an injury-riddled season, but you could point to a 149 weighted runs created plus in 2020. You could point to his 146 weighted runs created plus in 2021 heading into his contract. To a degree, you could even point to his 175 weighted runs created plus in 2015, where he was a September call-up. I felt like we've all been waiting for the season where Corey Seager puts it all together. He keeps up this offensive pace, and he's able to stay on the field for most of the season. And he stayed on the field enough to qualify. Right, he played 119 games, had 536 plate appearances, which is not necessarily a full season, but it is enough to qualify for the batting title. And like you mentioned, all of the batted ball metrics, it lines up a 93.3 mile per hour average exit velocity, the highest in any season throughout his career, a 38% sweet spot rate, which is elite, right? Good enough for 89th percentile. He hits the ball hard. He lifts it at a good rate, a 29% fly ball rate in Texas, especially, is good, a 27% line drive rate. He also just hits every pitch so well. How about, a 306 average and a 619 slug on four-seam fastballs with even better expected numbers. And then going into run value per 100, 2.7 against sliders, 2.7 against changeups, 2.7 against sinkers, 4.7 against curveballs, 3.7 against cutters. You can't really beat this guy with anything. He hits in every location. He hits every pitch type. He is one of the most consistent hitters throughout the league. And like I said, you can't beat him on anything. He only strikes out 16.4% of the time. That's what he did last year. And he's lived under 20% and in many seasons under 15%, or around the 15% marker in strikeout rate for every season. He's been in the top 10% of the league in expected slugging every year since 2020. Same with expected batting average. Same with expected WOBA. And yeah, we finally got to see it all put together last season. And I feel like we've been waiting to say this for a few years, but Corey Seager is the number one shortstop in baseball.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. With the batted ball metrics as good as they were, like, it, as I said, it's comparative to Judge, Ohtani, Yordan Alvarez, and that's while being a positive defender at the shortstop position. That's pretty unbelievable. And to go with that, like, if you, I calculated it yesterday. Like his F4 over 650 plate appearances would have been 7.4, which is an excellent, obviously MVP caliber season. And he has had his injury history, but part of that has just been bad luck. Like in 2021, he was out because he got hit on the wrist with a fastball, and that took him out for I think like 6 weeks or something like that. Last year, like he did have a hamstring issue, but part of his IL time was with a thumb injury, which I think had to do with him getting hit or something to do with a foul ball. So that's not something that's necessarily supposed to linger. It's just a weird, injury that comes with getting hit or whatever. So I don't think that injury history is necessarily something that we have to worry about as much as we do with like Mike Trout or like obviously Jacob deGrom when he was when he was on the field. Like with Corey Seager, I think that we can rely on him to go out and play 130 games this year. That's not something I would have a problem betting on. So yeah, I expect more things. Maybe even he could get that home run total to 40 this year. Like there's a lot to be excited about with Corey Seager. But yeah, that shall do it for the rankings. Now we will get into the 10 through 1 of the list. Do you want to go over your 10 through 1 for the shortstop position?
Yeah, I would love to. So at 10, I put JP Crawford. By the way, I was very close to putting Jackson Holliday at the 10, or even the 9. He was my 11 though. Yeah, but Jackson Holliday, very excited for. Number 10, I have JP Crawford. Number 9, I have Willy Adames. Number 8, Carlos Correa. Number 7, Xander Bogaerts. Number 6, Bo Bichette. Number 5, Trey Turner. Number 4, Dansby Swanson. Number 3, Francisco Lindor. Number 2, Bobby Witt Jr. And number 1, Corey Seager.
Right, yeah, like first base, the same 10, but in fairly different orders this time around. I think we
did have quite a lot of discrepancies in the order. I think the only ones we agreed on were 1 and 9.
Yeah, that's correct. Wow. So yeah, my number 10 was Carlos Correa. Number 9 was Willy Adames. 8, JP Crawford. 7, Bo Bichette. 6, Trey Turner. 5, Xander Bogaerts. 4, Bobby Witt Jr. 3, Dansby Swanson. 2, Francisco Lindor. And 1, Corey Seager. All right, so yeah, that shall do it for this week's positional rankings and this edition of Above Replacement Radio. We hope you enjoyed this one. If you are listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify and want to watch the conversation as it happens, go to the YouTube channel. It is called Above Replacement Radio. We have playlists for both the all the positional rankings individually, as well as Hall of Fame bubble case breakdowns, guest interviews, and also shout out to the Baseball History Series, of course, where we have a playlist for that. And then follow us on social media. Follow me on Twitter at Chris_Gianta. Follow Daniel on both Twitter and Instagram at Daniel_Curran, and follow the show Instagram at Above Replacement Radio for all the show needs. We hope you enjoyed this one, and we hope to see you next time, where we will be ranking the top 10 relief pitchers and second basemen for 2024. We will see you then.
This conversation is over.